First thing on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the February 22nd meeting. Anybody have any comments on those minutes?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the February 22nd minutes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
I need to practice that. So, okay, and then we have a time for public comment. Is there anything anybody wants to bring up for anything that's not on the agenda tonight? Okay. Then we have the agenda itself, approval of the agenda. Does anybody have any comments or want to make any changes to the agenda, or can I get a motion to approve it? Okay, we have a motion. Do I get a second on that?
Second.
Okay, all in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
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 Okay, opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Okay, Planning Commission business. We have the residential zoning update. You taking that, Mark?
I'll go ahead and introduce this. So this is something that the Planning Commission had been working on, I think off and on over the last 2 years, but due to the rural zoning update, it kept getting pushed to the back burner. So now that the rural zoning's been adopted, we can bring this forward again. So back last summer in July, I provided a memo to the Planning Commission that kind of gave an overview of some of the, I think more or less a strategy that the commission had talked about previously as far as some things you were hoping to accomplish by looking through the residential zoning ordinance, residential zoning districts. And what it was to look at probably having our existing R1, obviously that's already been developed, stay the same, but maybe looking for opportunities on some of the vacant parcels that exist in the township inside the growth boundary that are zoned R1 to see if there's a way to increase the density there while still keeping kind of in the character of the township. And that would become an R2 district, mixed density residential, and then a high density residential district to kind of capture a lot of the existing apartment units that we have and maybe even some townhome units. So I included that memo from last July just as a reminder. As I did not include, we actually, I think, started talking about potential standards for these districts, or at least for the mixed density district. That's the one I think everyone agreed we'd have to do the work on, since we already have an R1 and an R3, this R2 type district where you might want to look at increasing density and doing things a little differently than our current R2 district was the one that we talked about last fall a little bit. And that's what the concept rendering here that I put together is trying to show, kind of based on some of the standards we had talked about before. And the idea was to have this property is currently zoned R1 as well as residential office. This is, you all are familiar with where I'm talking about here off of 45 and 322. So this particular property, you say the northern part of it's zoned R1, the bottom part's actually zoned residential office. But the yellow shown on here is kind of a buffer area where, you know, the district could require the first 100 feet around any R1 zoned area to be developed with R1 style lots. And so that's what we're showing here, 7,500 square foot lots for a total of 40 lots there, could support 40 homes. And then the remainder, we kind of maxed out the site, to be quite honest with you. We wanted to see how much density we could put in there, and it was 241. They could be townhomes, they could be twin home type units, they could be individually owned, they could be all under single ownership. I don't know that any of these numbers are necessarily right as far as, setbacks from, as far as a buffer yard or buffer area, maybe you'd want 200 feet. It really comes down to which properties you'd want to try to look to include in this district. So that takes us back to those maps that were with the July memo that showed, some areas like this one being zoned in mixed density residential, as well as some areas out by like the Bowl Mansion and along Shingletown Road. If you were to do a wider R1 buffer there, you definitely would cut down on the amount of development potential on any of those properties. The bottom line, though, is with this particular example, this property could support around 150 single-family homes just zoned R1, but, almost an extra 100 homes if it were in some type of a mixed density district. So, thinking back on all of our experience with the rural zoning, it probably would be, if this is the route the planning commission wants to go, it would probably be a good idea to put some kind of, goals together, some statements of the planning commission's intent behind what you're looking to do here, just so that you can communicate that to the board along with any, and to the public for that matter, with any proposed ideas you might have about increasing the density. But we want to get your feedback tonight on whether or not you think this is on the right track, too dense, not dense enough. Just, and 10 dwelling units per acre is what we established for that orange area on the property, so.
If we leave something like this go, is there any reason to continue with R2 then? I mean, why would we have that? Like the gates, why would we have that if we're allowing this to be in part of R1? And the other part of this is, I guess, it's a percentage. We'd have to come up with a percentage that we would allow, that we would like to see as the mix.
This would be R2. This would be the new R2 district. Is
Okay.
And the gates would stay R2. I think on the maps that we showed,
Yeah,
the
that-
gates would stay R2, and it would be, you would be rezoning property, but changing the R2 district to provide more of a buffer than what, we don't have any required buffer now. And that was more of a, I think the idea there was, it might be more palatable to the community, just because there often is that perceived, do we want to have high-density housing next door? It might be a way of trying to blend any new development on these bigger properties with what's existing.
So we're talking about R2 allowing to have R1 in it, is that what you're saying? Or are we looking at
Dogs have something to say about it.
Or
Is that
somebody
Rich
at this
Man? Is
window
that
in the
Man?
background.
I mean, I
If he
feel that.
doesn't come back, we should check.
Check it out, make sure he's okay.
No, in this case, it wouldn't be the R1s being, our current R2 district allows R1 uses. In this case, the idea was it would be required anywhere that it's adjacent to R1. So you'd be requiring some type of a buffer between these R2 properties that would just be written into the ordinance. You couldn't do townhomes right up against the R1.
So you're basically taking the number of lots away that would be available on an R2 by requiring some R1.
Right, but you'd also be looking at rezoning properties that are R1 to R2, so.
And so then the R1 would also be able to have mixed use.
No, the R1 district is gonna just stay single family.
Okay, because if we were really trying to look for having density, and which would put less pressure on our agricultural and grow out, maybe we should consider that R1 should be able to have a little mixed use also. And again, it turns into percentages. I don't see any reason why you can't build a duplex in an R1 zone. I just don't.
And that's a discussion the commission can have. It's not one that you'd had up to this point. I mean, for the most part, most of our R1 properties have been developed. And I think that's where we'd be looking at having the R1 zoning remain. This was large properties that haven't been developed, that the commission, when we talked about how there is limited development potential within the growth boundary, this was one of the things that you talked about as a way of trying to increase that. I agree with you. You could always allow some other R1 properties that are smaller to have higher density residential. I just don't know if that's something that the board is interested in doing. We don't know if they're interested in doing this either. That's just.
Well, to me, it makes sense to do both. And again, it becomes percentages. I mean, I don't want to say in R1 and then somebody built 80% of it in duplexes. We'd have to consider what we would want that density would look like. But it does open the door to lower cost housing, which is an issue. You could definitely buy a half of a duplex cheaper than you can buy a single family house. And so that makes it more inclusive.
Any other comments on this? So I do recall that we talked about some of these R1 properties, like the one adjacent to Kaywood, and then these off of West Main. And we were kind of going back and forth with some of those in the past too, so I think we can continue to talk about that. But why don't we just talk about the R2 for a minute, get comments on that. Now, is the main change, the buffer, is the density pretty much the same as what it is now?
I think the density is a little higher than what we currently allow. Let me pull up the code here real quick.
Okay,
Probably not by much, if any.
okay. And while you're looking, I'm just going to comment that I personally don't see a need to have a transition R1 buffer along an existing road. So I don't know if we could write it that way, even though that, I guess the 45 itself, what is the middle of 45 is a zoning boundary?
More or less, yes.
Yeah, so I'd almost, I don't see a need for that, because you're right next to the road anyway, so what difference does it matter what's across the street from you?
To answer your question real quick, looking at our R2 district, it's a little under 10, it's 4,500 square feet per dwelling, so a little under 10 dwelling units to the acre is what we allow for townhomes in the R2 district. So
It's going from 10 to,
it'd be going from like probably 9.5 to 10.
oh, okay, so it's pretty close.
Pretty close.
So, anyway, that's my only comment, and I don't know how that would apply in other areas that we're looking at R2, I guess, 45, and then the Shingletown 45 as well. And then, and is that along West Main, is that the the Biddle property that you're talking
It's
about?
still owned by Biddle,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
Yeah. Mountain Spring Farm, I believe, is
Okay.
the owner. Yeah.
So in that case, if we went with this buffer, that all along those little dog legs that go around, that would have to have that transition
Right.
zone.
Yeah, I think the bulk of the, R2 style development would be kind of more centralized there at the common property line
Right.
with the Bull Mansion.
And I guess I can see where maybe that should apply to buffer should apply to West Main Street as well. I'm going to throw it out there. Does anybody see a need to have a buffer along 45, along an arterial?
I think it's helpful to have some sort of buffer along 45 than arterial like that.
Okay, because I mean, they're not going to have a row of single-family homes along 45.
They're not desirable.
Yeah, I mean, that's just what I'm thinking
So-
too. Almost would prefer that we required some kind of a landscape buffer instead.
It is what it's surrounded by, though.
When you look at it, being next to Kaywood and Willowbrook and Brookside, these are all the same sorts of neighborhoods.
All right. Yeah, I'm just talking about
I just think if
along the
I was a
highway.
developer, I wouldn't put the single-family lots along Route 45. I would put the fourplexes and the duplexes, because those would be my low-cost housing. And I would put my lots, my single-family
That's what
lots
I
in
was
the middle, yeah.
Yeah, we put the higher density along the road than.
That's the way I would
Yeah,
develop
but
it.
you're
because-
commenting, you and Amy were
sorry.
commenting that you think we should have a buffer along 45.
When you,
I'm talking about this stretch right here.
right,
Not along existing Willowbrook, and I would say the same thing's true all around all the other properties.
well, I think you should have buffer around those properties. I don't necessarily,
I agree, I think we should have buffers with the exception of if you're along 45, I'm just saying that would be the exception.
why is that the exception?
Because it's like what Jeff was saying, what good is a row of single-family homes along the
Well, I don't think
highway?
you should have, I don't think they should be single-family homes should be along 45.
Okay, well, that's I'm calling this a zoning buffer. Is that what, how do you want to classify it? A zoning transition buffer? And then maybe we should have a landscaping buffer rather than a zoning transition buffer along an arterial, is what I'm suggesting.
I think there should be a landscaping buffer along the arterial.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's
Yes.
kind of, I'm not, I don't know. Amy, if you, did you understand what I was saying?
It's clearer now.
Okay.
I guess just looking at the map, it makes sense, Mark, in what you're suggesting. But I think the reality is, who would want to be on those busy streets? And so I think that you make a very valid point, Jeff and Kent, that it seems like that makes sense. But I think visually, we'd want something, and so I like the idea of a landscaping buffer.
And that was something that was talked about, I think, in July, you know, it was in the memo. We just didn't go that far down. We want to get your thoughts on it.
Well, and
That's good to
I guess
hear.
we could even say that, even along, say in this particular drawing, even along Willowbrook there, would it be better to have a row of single-family homes or some kind of requirement for a landscaping buffer?
So, can I just bring up a concern with the landscaping buffer, and it's something that the Shade Tree Commission is actually looking at. We were required at our maintenance facility to do a buffer because we're in the corridor overlay and we're in the industrial zoning district. We lost like 38 of the trees that we had to plant, we had to redo, and it's kind of a hodgepodge and a mess. So the Shade Tree Commission is looking at those buffering requirements, and we have a person on our Shade Tree Commission who owns Green Horizon Landscaping. Trees are becoming pretty hard to come by, especially buffer trees, and then they get designed and planted and put in by people who aren't necessarily landscape architects, and those buffers die out. And we only look at them for what, 2 or 3 years? 3 years.
Well, they have to survive that long.
And they have to survive that long, and then nobody's paying attention to them. So I like the buffer idea. I think the buffer idea is great, but I know that the Shade Tree Commission is very concerned because you end up with really wonky looking buffers that then die out, no one's taking care of them. And I think the other concern, at least for me, is like if the mansion property were to develop, that's next to the village, which has smaller lots and they're single family homes. I like the idea of a transition between higher density housing and then that single family home housing. I agree, no one's gonna wanna put single family homes along Route 45. That's a busy road. And I don't care how desirable it is to live in Harris Township. People don't wanna live on 45, I get that. But I just feel like there should be a transition because then it just really looks like you just plop down higher density housing next to the village, next to Willowbrook, whatever, and it doesn't make sense to me. Just my 2 cents.
Okay. I mean, generally, I think these properties that you've shown proposed to, the ones we would change to R2 would be this property here. What do we want to call this property?
It's McShay parcel.
McShay parcel. And then how about over along, across from the mansion property? What's
Those are actually, one of those is owned by the Bowl Mansion, actually, it's Bowl property, and then the other 2, I can't remember who owned the other 2.
So those all are one now?
They are, yes.
I mean, to me, it makes sense to put the higher density along the busy street. So,
I was gonna share my screen.
You
here
should be able to
quick.
share it.
So this is oh boy, can't find the button there. Oh, hold on there.
There you go.
Let's minimize everybody. So this is a map of all of the significant, or R1 parcels that have some significant development potential. So,
excuse me, Rich, can you see this?
Yeah.
Okay.
so looking at it, it was, these 3 here were ones that we showed as R2 on the map. These here, one of them showed it as R2 and the other one did not. And the reason being is the Bollesburg Small Area Plan talked about these properties here both being developed more similar to the density and kind of development style of the village. So that would be something that I think, you know, I don't know this R2 district would really promote that kind of development. So that's something, whether or not you want to consider. And then these out here, number 10 and 11. I think it's the 11, yeah. So this is kind of, I wanted to bring this up kind of for Jeff when he mentioned about allowing higher density or maybe mixed density on other R1 properties. There's very, very limited potential aside from this one here, that one there, and then there is obviously quite a bit up here, but that's really kind of just part of Kaywood, or I mean, could be part of Kaywood. It would connect to Kaywood if it ever developed, I would assume. You already have the stub there from Catherine Street, so. Anyway, just wanted to provide that for context as far as where we have development potential in the R1 zone. This property over here on the hill has already been subdivided.
Right, and of those, the ones you've proposed on this map is 1, 2, and 3,
Yep.
and 4.
Yep. And a little bit of 5.
Actually, I guess we got a couple options.
There's,
Yes.
yeah, one shows this area here and one does not.
Why do you have the two different options there for both property, all property?
Mainly because of what the small area plan recommended with having kind of a development style similar to the village, if that's something that the township still feels strongly about. Or if you didn't want to rezone it at this time and wait to see until someone comes in with an idea for it that would be similar to the village, but I guess it comes down to how proactive you want to be to implement that part of the small area plan.
Right, so the ones we're talking about, we're a little more certain of is 1, 2, and 3, and then 10 and 11.
Yes.
And
Are you saying 10 is an R2 now?
It's R1 and RO.
Well, again, it's a percentage. I mean, the way you have this drawn up, you've got a bazillion fourplexes on here. I don't think I was ever considering that many fourplexes to be allowed. You know, I was thinking more like 25% of the property would be R2 and 75% would be R1. And that gives us some density in and some cost variations in the prices of houses. But it looks like here you have 75% fourplexes and 25% R1. I was thinking the exact opposite, you know. And you live in a mixed, lives in a mixed,
so Jeff, are you saying then rather than R2 is that we should have some other zoning district between R1 and R2 that would be this mixed?
yeah, that's
use?
what, I think that is a nice way to go as a developer and as offering some lower cost housing within Harris Township, but still keeping our, let's face it, we're a bedroom community of State College and still keeping that look. But you're finding it less and less affordable. And the only way you're going to get it is by multi-use housing or you can't buy a $100,000 lot and come up with a $250,000 home. It just doesn't happen. But you can do that if it's a threeplex or something, you know, and still get something in there for a price range that you could afford as a starter home.
So rather than 10 or 11 density units, an R1 is what, 5 or less than 5?
No, it's closer to 6. We require, well, I think it's 5. 7,500 square foot lots is the minimum.
Okay.
So yeah.
But yeah, with rights of ways and things
Yeah.
like that, yeah. So I guess, Jeff, you're saying something more that would be like a 7 or 8, somewhere in between those two would be
Yeah.
allowed density.
Yeah.
What-
Just to have an offering of some lower cost homes in Harris Township. And I think it looks nicer than just having a massive 8-plex development. And I don't find those necessarily very attractive, and they turn into parking nightmares also. You know, it just seems that if you spread it out, it's kind of a nicer way to live, I think. You get all kinds of folks living in a neighborhood.
So what I guess I'm hearing, it sounds almost like you'd like to have an R1 district that if you have a large amount of acreage, you are then permitted to have some higher density residential as part of your development if you're if you're developing.
If you so choose, yeah.
If you're developing a very large tract, and that could be a qualifier for how the ordinance would be structured to say, in R1, if you have this much acreage, you could have up to 25% of this type of style of housing as long as it's.
Why does it have to be an amount of acreage? Why can't it just be a percentage of what you're trying to develop?
Well, I
So if
think-
you only have 10 acres, you can only have one duplex.
Well, but I think it should be on the larger tracts, right? I don't think we want to put it on a 10 acre, but maybe we want to say a 20, 30, 40 acre tract. And then I like your percentage idea, 25%, you know, the multiplexes, and then the rest, 75% would be the single family homes, because then it's more of a transition, right? That always bothered me when you're driving down the road, you single family homes, boom, housing complex, single family home. Like it sticks out to me, and like I think the transition is a better idea. And I love your point about you get a mix of people then living in the neighborhood. And I think that's very important because we don't have a lot of neighborhoods that have a mix of people living in their neighborhoods.
Right, you don't. You can't find a kid to mow your lawn. You know, in a lot of neighborhoods, you know, they're just wrong group of people,
Yeah.
you know.
And that's helpful feedback. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, this wasn't like great artwork on our part, but it was to illustrate just simply if we go with 10 units to the acre and just a simple buffer, this is what you could get. So I think, you know, if you want, I can take this back and try to do a mix where I put 25% as duplex townhome style, and then the remaining 75% of units more like single family, and see how that looks. I mean, I guess that's the question, is what mixes do you want me to test out percentage wise? I mean, 25 and 75, is there anything else you?
Well, I guess, I think that would be good, but I'd also, how do you want to try to treat this transition buffer? You still want to try to make that R1, or just have a distance buffer? Not necessarily landscape?
I think who takes care of it, like you said, Amy? I mean, once it's required, we're not gonna, didn't you have this problem in your neighborhood? Didn't they just cut down all those trees along 322?
Those weren't required as a buffer. Those were put in by the developer in the 70s.
But now you attempted to build some kind of a buffer. I think Frank was part of that. It doesn't look like anything to me. All you're looking at is everybody's backyard.
Well, you need a couple years to get trees growing.
Could have bought bigger trees.
That's all I could afford.
But then, who is going to maintain that?
Well, in that case, that's on township-owned open space, so the township will always maintain those trees. We maintain the ones that were there before. But in the case of other buffers, like the gates is a good example. They have a buffer that they're gonna have to maintain. Like, the township isn't maintaining or owning any of these buffers, right? We're having people come in and they put in the buffers as part of their development plans. I mean, if you wanna see a great example of a really bad planting, look across the street from the township's maintenance facility on Discovery Drive. There's tree upon tree upon tree, and they're planted like this. They're all gonna grow together. And then and that was also the issue we had at the buffer along Bull Avenue. There were 130 trees that were still standing by the time we removed them. They all grew together, they all got a fungus, and they were all sharing the fungus with each other. And then they were, you know, they're too close together, and that's my problem with landscape buffers, because the regulations don't say you have to work with someone who knows anything about trees. So you sometimes have engineers that are just plopping trees in to make the count. And I mean, we're guilty. It was the same with us. Our engineer from Pantera just plopped in the trees, and the Shade Tree Commission looked at the species and said, oh, that's okay. And then, 38 of them didn't live.
Let's rewrite that.
They're gonna work on that.
That is a mistake, because even Harris Township building is, I brought this up before, I think it's just terrible. Pine trees together that, in 5 years, it's gonna look like one tree.
Yeah, and that's where Scott, I don't want to belabor the landscaping point, but that's where Scott Burke had offered, we walked the whole 4-acre property with him with the Shade Tree Commission last year, and he had offered, he said, like, if you're gonna look at the buffering regulations, I'd love to be a part of that discussion, because I do these everywhere. CJ Henry, who's on our Shade Tree Commission, same thing, he does them everywhere with Green Horizon. So we're picking apart right now. We just started looking at the ordinances that have the requirements for street trees. They have trees on that list that are trees that have died out, trees that have diseases, so they want to pull all that out, and then they want to look at the buffer, and they want to look at the spacing and the numbers, and And is there better things that you could do, a mix of plantings and fencing and things that'll be standing, right?
I think, is it our role to say that we need to have a buffer, right? But then we'll let it up to the Shade Tree Commissioner to decide what that buffer is going to be.
Well, I think what we'd like to do is we'd like to make sure in the ordinance encapsulate what that buffer means. But I think the buffer needs to be more flexible, because right now, isn't it like an either or? You can do the planting or you could do fencing.
No, before overlay, you pretty much have to do the plantings.
Yeah,
No real
so-
fencing option.
I think giving a fencing option in addition to a planting option, and then looking at the kind of species and the spacing, you know, I'd like to see what some other folks are doing in the state with buffering as well.
Didn't we just run into that with passing the brew pub over there by the chapel? I mean, the number of plantings that we required in that small piece of property just did make no sense. It just didn't.
Yeah, I mean, and to be honest, I think I was very ignorant to the whole issue, not saying I don't pay attention, because I do when I'm here, but then when we had to do our buffer planting, it was ridiculous. And then when we walked it with Scott Burke, I mean, and he stood by all the trees, right, guaranteed them for a year, and came in and switched out some of the species and moved things around, but that's when we really got the gist of, wow, like we literally just have a tree planted in the middle of the stormwater basin because we had to put a tree somewhere. Like it doesn't, I mean, it's just like an island unto itself. It doesn't, what is it buffering from? It's by itself.
You should have seen what you made the golf course plant. It was crazy. It was crazy. And when we let them have the hotel, they had
Well, I
to
think,
go part of
yeah,
that.
I'm still in favor of a buffer. I think maybe we just need to revise the requirements to plan for, you know, that it's not some instantaneous buffer, that it's something that eventually would be nice, you know, because I still see an advantage to having a landscape buffer, not necessarily that's, you know, a wall, and, but just something that's a nice, you know, provides some type of visual kind of breakup from having, you know, a structure right next to you.
That's what I was saying, if we could say it needs to be a buffer, but let the people who are working with the buffering materials, whether it be.
Right, and I think if we're, and most of the times, these buffers are gonna be either on private property or, you know, with an association, so we could have a requirement that they, you know, they have to maintain them. And, which I recognize as an enforcement issue, but still, you know, if it's, normally once a buffer is established, you know, most property owners are gonna try to do some type of maintenance. I mean, certainly you're gonna have die-off, but you can always just replant some things in there to replace that as well. Kind of like, you know, parking lot trees or street trees, you know, if they die off, then you have a requirement to replace them.
Can we do that where we have them designed and then just approve that?
I think I want to look and see what other things are out there in terms of the buffering regulations and things, because I know, like, when we were looking at replacing that buffer along Bull Avenue, right, which again is on our open space, but we had originally, we were going to put in a fence. We thought we'll do a fence, that's easier, then you don't see the people's backyards. The fences are really expensive and it's a 1/4 mile long. So we actually have a plan. I mean, we worked with a landscape architecture student to come up with a plan to put the landscaping in. It just has to grow now. I mean, that's the whole problem with the buffer, right? And the trees don't have to grow. So I think we want to look and see what's out there. And then I know the Shade Tree Commission, we just started delving into the subdivision regulations and the street trees and things. But I think we'll see what's out there and bring some ideas back to the Planning Commission.
Okay. Any comments from those on Zoom? Okay.
In general, you know, I think we just need to fix the, you know, how we do the landscape buffer, but I'm more in favor of a landscape buffer, at least like along 45 as an arterial than a transitional buffer, just in that type of location. Whether it's, you know, we have it prepared by a landscape architect, or whether we have it reviewed by our, you know, Shade Tree Commission. You know, I think that's what needs to be fixed rather than getting rid of the buffer.
Okay,
I was gonna say that, it's interesting to hear all, all the different options, because I think it's great if we can have, visual representation of it, so we can see what it would look like in different stages. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention was, the idea of making sure that whatever we decide to do in terms of the planting, that we're looking at non-invasive planting that are, low maintenance. Because, depending on the person who's going to be maintaining, they may not have any idea, as Amy was saying, on how to maintain whatever is growing. And at different stages of planting, so from trees to shrubs, you're going to have to do different things. So without having somebody come in and give general recommendations, it's probably helpful to have at least low maintenance plants for those areas.
okay.
I have one addition. I think in the parcel of land that we're looking at in particular, connectivity to trails and parks are going to be very important in that spot because those are very busy streets and we'll want to give people safe options for recreation, but also connecting to other trails that are nearby.
So, does Phasic come out
Yes.
there?
Yeah.
So they could connect,
It's been shown on our official map for a while, a connection there. And we're in the process, Bob was on that committee, we're in the process, and Richard, of redoing the official map. So that's one of the connections we want to keep on. We're looking at, the last time we did the official map, it became like this giant wish list and it really didn't serve us greatly over the last so many years. So we're looking now at, okay, like this is prime, this could be developed, so let's make sure we have, to Amy's point, the connectivity through there. And we
Right.
have
Okay.
the trails and stuff.
So-
Especially since there are bike trails right
Yes.
there. And if people can't connect to those bike trails, then we're gonna see some unsafe choices.
and that little right-of-way you have drawn there, is that a township right-of-way right on the other side where the cul-de-sac is right now?
Yeah, that's
So
that's already a.
That could be connected,
Yeah, that could be connected.
not without some objection, I'm sure.
That's it.
It's always a good time.
I think the official map actually shows that connecting as it is, and actually the first cul-de-sac here to the east, or to the south of that little connection you're talking about, that actually is shown on the official map as all being part of Phasic Park in the future. On the map behind you, facility, I think 18. My eyes are good enough to catch that.
16?
16? Yeah.
Oh, okay.
All right, so this,
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
this is.
the yellow dots there are the
yeah, that's the path, yeah.
pa-
We took some liberty with this just to show how it could be developed, recognizing there
Okay.
is official map stuff that would apply that wouldn't necessarily look like this, but
Mhm.
just to.
Okay. Getting enough feedback?
Yeah, I think so. I'll come back next month with probably something a little more refined than this, and obviously using kind of a percentage of units rather than just a base density limitation. We'll do 25% townhome duplex, and then kind of intersperse those with 75% single family and see what it looks like.
Okay.
So you feel like that's the right mix?
So we can talk about that as well as, which always keep that numbered map available too, because I think we can talk about which numbers
Where it should be
where we
applied
should
to.
want to do that. Okay, is there any other comments before we move on to the next item then? Okay, so updating the remaining zoning districts.
So this is an item I think Chris actually was interested in, but I don't think he hasn't made on the call. So he asked that we provide an update of where we're at on all of the zoning districts that we've already worked on and what still needs to be done. So as you all know, the rural districts have been taken care of as of last week, so that's out of the way.
Get the champagne.
We're working on the residential districts here, at tonight's meeting, and we already did handle the village district. Back in 2021, the board adopted changes to that, and that's one of our residential districts. So these remaining three, based on kind of our feelings as staff, we think that probably by the end of this year, you'll hopefully have a pretty ironed out idea of what you'd want to recommend to the board in terms of how to move forward and make some modifications, whether it be a new R2 district or overlays or how we ever end up, coming together on all of that. So that's where we're at on the residential districts. The commercial industrial districts, the board had created the village commercial district back in 2018, which was part of the small area plan. So we really don't have much commercial and industrial land left to review aside from the cultural district is probably the biggest piece. We have a little bit of commercial out along Discovery Drive, and then some residential office out at the intersection of Bull Avenue and Warner Boulevard. There also is actually a lot of RO zone property at the bottom portion of this lot that we just talked about that extends out along 322 where the state maintenance facility is at. So those we feel like should probably wait until the residential updates are completed. They don't feel like a high priority, at least from a staff perspective. Probably the biggest priority that we feel should move forward is looking at the corridor overlay district, which is what you all were talking about here a little bit with landscaping. That's where those landscape buffers are required and where the definition of how dense they need to be planted is located. So we really feel like, first and foremost, the village commercial district, it has its own landscaping standards and was exempted from the corridor overlay requirements. So really, these corridor overlay standards don't apply to that many more properties, or probably won't apply to many more properties, since they don't apply when residential development occurs. So it's really a question of what does the township want to do with these? Do you want to just incorporate landscaping requirements into the commercial districts independently? Do you still want to have a corridor overlay district? And if so, what do you want to accomplish with it? So we really feel like that's probably something that should be added to your agenda here pretty soon, and start working on that concurrently with residential.
You say there isn't that many, but what happens if Tussie gets sold?
It's outside of the,
not in the
it's
corridor
outside, it's not in the corridor.
You wouldn't have to do that there.
It's only 660 feet from 45 and 322, so that's well outside of that
Okay.
area.
Any other?
No, sorry.
Yeah, just see if we get any comments on Mark's presentation so far on that. Okay.
Would you like me to put corridor overlay on your agenda next month, or to at least start talking about it, or just focus?
We just
on
want to
residential?
hammer out the district, or
What?
the residential district first, and then move on to.
Yeah, I would, how's Parks, or, is that Tree Commission's going to, how are they going to be work? What's their time schedule?
Yeah, so I think if you waited to May to meet with them, May or June, that would be better, because they are comprehensively looking at all the tree ordinances that we have. They have their own shade tree ordinance that we're gonna update. We have a species list that we're updating. We have rules for arbor work that we're updating. And so I would like them to have time to look at that buffer regulation, and then maybe what we could do is make your May or June meeting a joint meeting with them, and we can sit down and collectively talk about it, and they can sort of present their ideas. And I'll see if, May's probably better in terms of getting a landscape person to come, see if Scott Burke could come maybe to that meeting and start having that discussion as well.
Okay, does that make sense for everybody then?
I don't know my trees at all, so.
Just keep in mind too, corridor overlay does a lot more than tree requirements. There are other things in there you'll need to consider if you want to keep them in some fashion, or if you want to
And
roll
maybe,
them into the zoning ordinance elsewhere.
maybe we could break it up so that just at the May meeting, we talk just about the landscape requirements, so it doesn't get bogged down. And then at your June meeting, you can talk about sort of the other stuff that's in that regulation.
Sure.
Okay. All right, that sounds good. Are we done with that item then?
Yes.
Okay. All right, the CRPA Planning Commissioner Training Program.
Yeah, so our office is trying to put together kind of an introduction to planning in the Center Region type course. We had done one back in 2017 at Millbrook Marsh, and I think several of you likely attended that, if I recall correctly. But with the pandemic and staff shortages, we haven't been able to continue to host those events. But what we were trying to do, because we've had a couple municipalities request training, is put something together that would be done in a multiple sessions that we were hoping maybe municipal planning commissions could volunteer to host one, each host one of those sessions. So maybe one at the Center Region Planning Commission meeting, and then one at each of the municipalities, if we, up to probably 6 or 7 in total. Obviously, we'd schedule or publish the schedule for all the planning commission members in the region. You could attend either virtually or in person, but it might be a good way of trying to find a night when most people are going to be available. Looking at the municipal schedule, it's like, unless everybody wants to meet on Friday nights for a planning commission training, it's probably not going to work out that people are going to be free. But we felt like that might be a good way of trying to accommodate everyone's schedules. So just wanted to see if the commission would be interested in attending, and also if you'd be willing to host one of those at an upcoming meeting. We figure it would take about an hour for each one, probably about 30 minutes to 45 minutes of actual presentation from our staff and the municipal planning staff in the region, and then time for questions.
So is it, we would have our meeting and then followed by training? Is that your?
Or training followed by the meeting. It just depends on.
It'd be kind of interesting to have everybody, different commissioners sit at different municipalities, sit in on
We could definitely do it at the fire hall too, so we have more room.
I don't know. I mean, it would give us a different, give us perspectives on what maybe, how the other guys.
So have you looked at the, everybody, the different schedules that all the different municipalities have for their planning commission
We have,
meetings?
yeah.
Would that jive? Okay.
For the most part, there's probably some municipalities that have second meetings that might not work because there's other municipalities having a second meeting the same night. So we would have to work that out so there's no
Obviously,
conflicts, but it's
They
possible.
talk about it. so
Definitely much easier
think we
than
know
trying to
what we're
find a
doing.
night where no one has a meeting. And I think our preference, to Bob's question, would be to have the training first, just because that way it's a predictable start time for everyone. If they're waiting for everyone to get done with the regular business, they'll be.
Yeah, no, you aren't forcing people to sit and watch to get to the meeting. I get that.
We could have our buddies from College Township come, so Kent doesn't feel,
Yeah, there you go.
part of the
Yeah.
club again.
Yeah, relive old times.
So, and as I mentioned in here, we're thinking probably May or June we'd start, but we're thinking maybe a couple before summer, and then after summer, we'd take a break over summer since folks won't necessarily all be around.
I mean, we don't want to do training in the summer.
Or on Friday nights, summer and Friday nights, no.
It's a winner.
Okay. Any other comments on that item then? Okay, we'll move on then to the agenda for April.
So it looks like we're gonna talk about the residential zoning stuff again. Todd is off celebrating his 30th wedding anniversary. That's why he's not here this evening. So I can't tell you if we'll have any plans or not.
I think, well, we don't have anything currently that I think would be
Yeah, I don't know that we have anything. So
maybe.
if we can focus on the residential zoning stuff, and then we'll do that joint meeting with the Shade Tree Commission in May to talk about the landscape buffer and stuff, if that works.
Okay? Okay, then we move on to reports. Zoning permits, do we have anything to hand out?
Well,
tonight?
so in addition to Todd being off celebrating his wedding anniversary, Deb is on vacation for the first time since 1999, so
Really?
it's like the B
Wow.
team is
Came-
like running the
came
show
up quick.
today.
Amy's having a party. Everybody's gone.
I could find nothing, so I don't know where the zoning permits are. You'll see that next month.
Okay. All right, Center Region Planning Commission.
The Center Region Planning Commission met on March 3rd. A summary of the meeting was circulated to, I believe, everyone on this call on March 8th, but it's also published on the CRPC website and on the Facebook page. So if you would like to read the summary, you can find the complete summary of the meeting there. I will share with you that we spent a little bit of time talking about the College Township historically significant property regulations and some adjustments that they are making. We also had a conversation about a new approach to the comprehensive plan and respecting the work of the good committees and groups that already put in reports and hard work and thinking about things. So building on the work that the existing committees already do and developing the comprehensive plan from that. And so I don't know, if Mark, if you have anything to add about that, but that is coming our way, developing the new comprehensive plan.
Bob has a question.
Yeah, saw that in the report. I read it. So is the concept that we have various plans out there and that you would develop the comprehensive plans from those plans, but they wouldn't be developed, I mean, in the past, we've had, so Harris Township had our plan that was part of the comprehensive plan. So is this different than it would, Harris Township and the municipalities wouldn't have their own plan? This would be one plan that generated from all the different portions of different.
Yeah, well, the municipalities haven't had their own individual comprehensive plans for a long time, actually, where they've had their own individual plan just for their municipality. We've had smaller plans for the township, like the small area plan. We've not had a Harris Township comprehensive plan, I don't think, since 1976. Might have been the last time there was individually adopted plans that were then incorporated into one. So this is going to be more of an issues-based plan, ideally, where it's going to not just focus on land use, transportation, housing, but maybe specific issues related to those topics. But the idea is also, rather than being redundant in the comp plan, where we're saying a lot of the same things that are in the long-range transportation plan, the climate action plan, referencing those plans in the comp plan, rather than having everything just reiterated again.
So, I guess, yeah, I misspoke about having the Harris Township comprehensive plan, but there was always that section of the comprehensive plan that dealt with Harris Township. And if my memory is correct.
I think there was in 2000. The 2010 plan does not have that.
Okay.
Or the 2013 plan, I'm sorry, that's when it was adopted. The 2013 plan is just broken into different chapters, and it doesn't specifically speak to any one municipality on anything. They're very broad goals. So certainly, if there are specific issues that are municipal specific, they could be, addressed in this issues-based comp plan. But I think the idea was not to have constant redundancy throughout this plan of stuff that's said in other plans that get updated all the time as well. Just reference those, and then when they get updated, by that nature alone, the comp plan will be updated, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Did you guys talk any about commercial solar at all?
We have, but not at this last meeting.
Yeah, the next time that will be, you're talking about the utility scale?
Yes.
That's going to be at the joint meeting in April between the Lucy Committee and the
Right, so that's
CRPC.
coming up.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions for Amy? All right, did we have a MPO technical committee?
We didn't, but I'll mention one thing about the State College Area Connector Project, which Mr. Harrigan has heard about. The State College Area Connector Project next round of public meetings will be April 5th from 3 to 8 p.m. at Calvary Baptist Church, and April 6th from 3 to 8 p.m. at Center Hall Fire Company. We had a meeting with PennDOT back in February, which I told you about before, but it is critically important that residents go to that meeting, one of those meetings, and continue to bring home the concerns about impacts, potential impacts. They have been updating the background mapping that they use, the base layers that they used to do as the basis for where they're putting their proposed alignments. I know Mark sent back some comments and things that they had missed, and they've tried to update based on what they heard at the other meetings. But following these meetings, this summer, they're gonna pick 2 to 3 alignments that they will then send forward for further environmental study. So it's very important that they hear from the public at this meeting, again, to hear concerns and impacts and things.
Is it the same presentation they did before?
It'll be updated, so they showed us at our meeting back in February, and they showed Mr. Harrigan at the CCMPO Technical Committee meeting what they've updated. So they updated all the origination and destination for the traffic, and they did one just for the trucks, and not surprisingly, it shows that 62% of the trucks that are coming this way want to go to I-80. They did one for passenger vehicles, and that showed that 54% of the passenger vehicles are going to State College. Again, not surprising. And then they've already started to look at, they showed us some very preliminary ways they might be able to engineer the road if they stayed on the existing alignment to get around Discovery Drive and our maintenance facility in the industrial area, and how they said they're looking more closely at the existing alignment now because they have so much right-of-way out there. And then they're looking at if they make the median 16 feet, they just have to put a concrete barrier in, and then that gives them more room. Some of the things they've done in other districts, they did that down in Harrisburg. They just took 83 from a 4-lane highway to a 6-lane highway and didn't have to take a ton of property when they did it because they made the median smaller. They looked at how they could kind of configure things differently. So they're looking at different things. One of the things that we brought up to them, which I hope they're going to look at, and I think if you guys want to make this comment to them, this would be great. They're doing the US 15 bypass out of Harrisburg. So when you're coming out of Harrisburg, you want to go to 80, US 15 is going to be a 4-lane road that will take you directly to I-80 at Williamsport. So the question that we asked them, and this came from the Planning Commission chairwoman in Potter Township, she told me about this. We asked them, how's that going to impact the trucks that are coming up here just because they need to get to 80 and they're coming from Harrisburg? And they said, we didn't know that project was going on. So it's unbelievably frustrating at times. So perhaps people need to make that comment, because my understanding is that 15 bypass is in the works and is going to be done here in the time frame when they're looking at what they're doing. Because one of the other comments that we made at the meeting, and Potter Township made this comment as well, we almost have 2 projects, right? You need the one that gets the trucks to 80 because they don't really want to go to State College. And then you have the one that gets the passenger vehicles that are coming here to go to work because State College is a regional job center, or that are coming here for a special event. And how do you do that? Like, if you just address the trucks and you take them out 144, which is the direct route, you still have the issue of 322 is still not great, right? And it's the amount of traffic on that road, it's very undersized for the amount of traffic, and it's got all the dips in it and whatever. So
Safety issue.
yes, huge safety issues. So there's a lot of, I think they're trying to put a round peg in a square hole, and it's not really working so well.
2 different problems.
Yes, exactly. And they did not, for the longest time, they didn't believe any of us. Like Potter Township was saying the same thing. The trucks are going to 80. Oh no, they're going to Clearfield to the distribution center for Walmart or something. And I'm like, no, they're not all going to Walmart. Like, they want to go to 80. And also, they've raised the tolls so much on the turnpike. Bud's son is a long haul truck driver. Bud's son would go the turnpike, but the tolls are so high, I think because they want to keep the trucks off of the turnpike. So that's another issue that, again, that's something legislature has to figure out.
I've been on the turnpike, there's no trucks.
Yeah, it's too expensive.
81 now is unbelievable.
Yes,
Yeah.
It's nothing but trucks.
yeah.
You're 3-to-1 on 81, trucks to cars.
Yeah. So if you could make sure to go to those public meetings, I know the last ones, George went, and George went to all of them, and he stayed the entire time at all the meetings. And they know him by name now. So God bless George. April 5th at Calvary Baptist.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Amy. Spring Creek Watershed Commission, Bob.
Yeah, we met Wednesday. We're still in the process of forming their Phase 3 Technical Committee for the One Water project. So that's in the works, and they've done some updates to the Atlas project website.
Okay. Any questions for Bob? All right, the
Find any good fish?
Village Parking Committee. Randy, you?
I don't know how much information you want to hear, but
I don't know if we need to have him.
Oh, can you go to the mic, Randy,
Oh.
since you're in the audience there? So they can hear you.
yes, we met, called for suggestions, and Mark posted stuff on the map of potential parking lots such as St. John's, the Fire Hall, the Township Building, Blue Spring Park, and the post office. The post office was originally mentioned just as off-hours parking, but then Bud Graham raised the point that that lot is still privately owned. It's not owned by the post office. It's still locally owned, and that the post office is not 100% happy with that building. So that raised a lot of different, but then Mark brought up the official map and other potential lots that might be acquired as parking lots. And one of them was Swank House on East Pine, apparently is empty. And the Verizon building and the garage, which would be ideally located just off the Diamond, and the parking lot behind Kelly's across the street from the Heritage Museum. And again, the post office came up as a potential purchase if the post office were going to build on a different location. So Mark said he would do a study of numbers in terms of on-street parking and current off-street parking for the next meeting. But each of these locations that were suggested presented their own complications in terms of access and, well, physical access in terms of driveways, but also some of them, many of them, have other requirements during the day, or St. John's, for example, have choir practice certain nights of the week, and so that would be out of the question for other people to park there. And of course, Blue Spring Park was mentioned, but there was the issue of the distance from where people want to be from the Diamond.
That's healthy.
But then the other point that was brought up was that frequently public parking lots have restroom facilities. And Blue Spring Park is the one and only place that was mentioned that already has porta potties down there. Anything else that I?
Might be used once the beer pub is open.
That's right.
How about Gary McShay's 4-bay empty garage?
We did talk about that.
Yeah, that would be ideal location.
Yeah, we're gonna vet hopefully before the next meeting, we'll have vetted some of this and then we'll discuss it again. It was Kent was there. It was, I think, a very interesting conversation because it's not really one that's been had in the past. Like, we've mentioned in all these plans, oh, the church is in the fire company and we should do the parking. And I guess somebody approached the fire company a long time ago, but nobody's ever followed up on these things since then. So it was good to sort of have the discussion and hear some of the concerns and some of the issues that we haven't thought of.
Thank you, Randy. Amy, any other comments or questions? Okay, recent actions by the Board of Supervisors.
So the rural zoning is finally approved and signed and sitting in there. That's all done. The board reviewed the site plans for the car company in 420 Bowl Avenue, which you guys saw last month. They approved the Bowl Beer Works final land development plan, and they approved the Lingle minor subdivision plan and the Lingle planning module. And one thing I will tell you, the road diet is sort of on pause based on the feedback that the supervisors received from the public. However, we're moving forward with the Bowl Avenue needs study to look at road projects in that corridor, safety improvements, traffic signals, that kind of thing. We've put together a survey with our traffic engineer. We're gonna send that to you guys, to the police, to the fire company, some other people. There's 16 projects identified. I had him add one at that intersection where the accident was. We're gonna get those ranked. And then we're gonna come up with a scope for this needs study based on the ranking. So maybe the top 10 projects. The idea is then Rob, our traffic engineer, will put together cost estimates, project renderings, and then we will use that as the basis to go to PennDOT and say, if they're gonna do a betterment project, hey, we'd really like to do this project here, you're gonna do this, or we'll apply for a Green Light Go grant to do this project at the traffic signal or whatever. So hopefully the goal is to just make that entire corridor safer. That road, I've mentioned this a couple times to people and talked to people about it. We used to be a very rural community, and we are not anymore. We're a very suburban community. And things like that slip lane off of 45 out here are not a great idea anymore. You know, maybe they don't work as well. So looking at how we can make that safer, and then also looking at, we have people that want to go to Discovery Drive, to go up to the church, to go to the bike trails. How can we accommodate some limited bicycle facilities within the corridor? And I think what happened with the road diet, it got conflated with, oh, we're just gonna put in bike lanes and everyone's gonna ride bikes everywhere, and why are we doing that? And the safety stuff didn't get picked up, so we're trying to pick up the safety stuff and move that forward. So I will be sending out that survey to you guys tomorrow to fill out.
Oh.
It's on Survey Monkey, so it's easy.
And when do you need them?
In the next week or so, ideally.
Oh, I forgot to pass the word.
Okay.
What time's the meeting on the 5th? I'm sorry. I didn't write that down.
The meeting up at the church.
Oh, the PennDOT meeting's at 3 o'clock.
3 o'clock?
3 to 8 p.m.
3 to
so
8.
it won't, you won't be there the whole time, I'm sure.
Well, we can if we bring pizza, right?
I mean, if
I
you're
believe
George,
it's a drop-in, yeah?
if you're George just took up residence when he was there. It's great. George and Diane Farr. Diane Farr did the exact same thing from the Parks Committee.
Get George a table.
Yeah, we get George's. I'll take this table up for him.
Okay, thanks. Anything else that we need to bring up tonight? If not, I'll accept a motion for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn this meeting?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to